the city burns. Constantinople, jewel of the Byzantine world, is a river of fire, smoke curling into the cold January sky, carrying the screams of the dying. From the heights of the imperial palace, Emperor Justinian surveys the chaos, the weight of an empire pressing down, advisors urging flight, escape waiting at the harbor. Yet one voice rises above panic, cutting through hesitation with unwavering authority. Theodora, once a street performer, now empress, stands before him, her presence deliberate, her words measured, commanding. She refuses compromise, she refuses cowardice. And in that decisive moment, the fate of the empire teeters, hinging on her courage, her judgment, and the resolve of one extraordinary woman. Deep in the heart of southern Africa, where rolling granite hills rise from wide-open plains and ancient rivers cut through the land, lies one of the greatest forgotten achievements in human history. Hidden for centuries beneath vegetation, dust, and deliberate lies, stands a city built entirely of stone. A city without mortar. A city without written records. A city so vast, so complex, and so magnificent that when outsiders first saw it, they refused to believe Africans could have created it. This is Great Zimbabwe. For hundreds of years, its massive granite walls stood in silence. Winds passed through its narrow corridors. Rain washed over its carefully stacked stones. Generations were born and died in its shadow. And yet, the world beyond southern Africa knew almost nothing about it. Maps left this region blank. European scholars dismissed African history as primitive. Empires rose and fell elsewhere, while this extraordinary monument remained ignored, misunderstood, and intentionally erased. Today, when visitors walk through the ruins, they are often stunned by what they see. Towering walls reaching over 30 feet high, curving stone passages that twist and turn like a maze, enclosures so precisely constructed that not even a knife blade can slip between the stones. An enormous elliptical structure known as the Great Enclosure, larger than many medieval castles. And at its heart, a mysterious solid stone tower, rising silently toward the sky. Nothing about this place feels accidental. Everything speaks of planning, organization, authority, power. Yet for centuries, much of the world was told that Africans could never have built something like this. The story you were taught was wrong. Great Zimbabwe was not built by foreigners, not by Phoenicians, not by Arabs, not by Israelites, not by mythical visitors from distant lands. It was built by Africans, by the ancestors of the Shona people, by engineers, masons, rulers, traders, and farmers who created one of the most sophisticated civilizations of the medieval world. But before we can understand how this city was built, we must first understand how it was hidden. Because Great Zimbabwe was not lost by accident. It was buried beneath lies. Long before Europeans ever set foot in southern Africa, the ruins were already known. Local communities lived around them. Farmers cultivated nearby fields. Elders passed down stories of powerful kings and ancient wealth. The very name Zimbabwe comes from the Shona phrase Zimba Zimbabwe, meaning houses of stone or venerated houses. To the people who lived here, there was never any mystery. They knew who built it. They knew what it represented. They knew it was sacred. But to the outside world, Africa was imagined as a land without history, a continent without architecture, a place where civilization had never taken root. And when European explorers eventually stumbled upon these stone walls, their worldview shattered. How could people they considered primitive have built something so advanced? They had two choices: accept the truth, or deny it. They chose denial. Imagine standing on the Zimbabwe Plateau in the 13th century. The morning sun rises over granite hills. Cattle low in nearby enclosures. Smoke rises from cooking fires. Merchants prepare their goods. Blacksmiths strike glowing iron. Women grind grain. Children run through stone passages. You are standing in the capital of a powerful state. A city that connects gold fields in the interior to trading ports on the Indian Ocean. A city that trades with Arabia, Persia, India, and China. A city that controls wealth flowing across continents. This is not a village. This is not a tribe. This is a state, a civilization. At its peak, Great Zimbabwe may have housed nearly 18,000 people. Thousands more lived in surrounding settlements. Together, they formed the heart of a regional empire that dominated southern Africa for centuries. And all of it was built without cement, without steel, without modern machinery, only human skill, organization, and intelligence. The walls of Great Zimbabwe are masterpieces of engineering. Each granite block was carefully shaped, each stone placed by hand, each layer laid using a technique called coursing, where stones are stacked in even rows that gradually curve inward, giving the wall strength and stability. No mortar holds them together. Gravity does. Friction does. Precision does. Some walls contain nearly 1 million stones. Think about what that means. Millions of tons of rock cut, carried, shaped, and assembled by human labor. This required skilled masons, architects, organizers, labor managers, food suppliers, political authority, religious legitimacy. It required a system, and systems only exist in complex societies. At the center of this system stood power, political power, spiritual power, economic power. Great Zimbabwe was not just a city. It was a statement, a declaration in stone. It told everyone who approached, this land is controlled, this wealth is protected, this authority is real. The rulers of Great Zimbabwe governed through a sacred kingship. Their authority was not only political, it was spiritual. They were believed to connect the living with the ancestors. They ensured rain, fertility, and prosperity. If the land flourished, it meant the ancestors approved. If drought came, it meant leadership had failed. Power here was never absolute. It was conditional, and that made it fragile. But for centuries it worked. Gold flowed from nearby mines. Ivory arrived from distant forests. Cattle filled royal enclosures. Trade routes connected the city to the Swahili Coast. Ships carried Zimbabwean goods across the Indian Ocean. Glass beads from Persia, ceramics from China, cloth from India, coins from Arabia. All of them found their way into the stone city. Great Zimbabwe was not isolated. It was global. And yet, despite all this evidence, when Europeans finally encountered these ruins in the 19th century, they refused to believe what stood before them. They saw genius, but they could not imagine African genius. They saw civilization, but they could not imagine African civilization. So they invented myths, and those myths would shape history for over 100 years. The African sun beats down mercilessly on the rocky plateau of southern Africa. The air is dry. The terrain is harsh. Thorny bushes tear at clothes and skin. Sweat pours down the face of a tired European traveler as he pushes his way through the wilderness. His name is Karl Mach, a German geologist, an adventurer, a man driven by dreams of gold and discovery. For weeks, he has been following the stories told by his African guides. Stories of strange stone ruins hidden in the hills. Stories of ancient walls. Stories of lost wealth. Stories passed down for generations. At first, he dismissed them. Europeans often did. Local knowledge was rarely taken seriously. But curiosity kept pulling him forward. And then suddenly the landscape opens. Before him rises something that does not belong to the wilderness. Massive granite walls, towering stone structures, curving passages climbing the hillside, perfectly fitted blocks. A city made of stone. Karl Mach stops walking. He stares. His heart races. His mind struggles to understand what his eyes are seeing. Because according to everything he has been taught, this should not exist. Mach had been educated in 19th century Europe, an era when racism was not just common. It was scientific. European scholars classified human beings into races. They ranked them. They declared some superior and others inferior. Africans were placed near the bottom. They were described as childish, backward, incapable of advanced thought. This ideology justified empire. It justified conquest. It justified exploitation. And it shaped how men like Mach saw the world. So when he stood before Great Zimbabwe, he faced a crisis. Either his education was wrong, or his eyes were lying. He chose to believe his education. That night, by candlelight, inside his tent, Moch wrote in his journal. He could not say Africans built this, so he invented alternatives. Perhaps, he wrote, the ruins were built by Phoenicians, ancient Mediterranean traders, or maybe by Arabs, or by Egyptians, or by the legendary Queen of Sheba. Eventually, he settled on his favorite theory. This must be Ophir, the biblical land of gold, the place where King Solomon obtained his legendary wealth. According to Moch, Great Zimbabwe was proof of the Bible, proof of ancient Israelite greatness, proof of European civilization's superiority. Anyone but Africans. Could be anyone except Africans. There was only one problem. The evidence did not support his claims. Not a single Phoenician artifact. Not a single Hebrew inscription. Not a single Middle Eastern building technique. Nothing. But Moch ignored that, because facts did not matter. Belief did. Moch returned to Europe as a celebrity. He gave lectures. He published accounts. He told audiences about a mysterious African ruin built by ancient foreigners. His story spread. Newspapers printed it. Books repeated it. Explorers quoted it. And soon, his fantasy became accepted truth. The Phoenician theory. The Solomon theory. The non-African theory. A lie dressed as scholarship. But Moch was not acting alone. He was part of a larger system. A system that rewarded denial. A system that punished truth. During this period, Europe was entering the scramble for Africa. Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, and Belgium were racing to divide the continent. They seized land. They imposed borders. They extracted resources. They enslaved labor. They destroyed kingdoms. And they needed a moral excuse. They found it in racism. Africans, they claimed, were uncivilized. Therefore, Europeans had the right to rule them. Great Zimbabwe threatened that story. If Africans had built cities, states, and trade empires, then colonialism was theft. So the truth had to be buried. Soon after Moch's reports, more Europeans arrived. Treasure hunters, missionaries, adventurers, speculators. They came not to understand. They came to extract. They believed Solomon's gold was hidden beneath the stones. They dug. They blasted. They smashed walls. They ripped open floors. They destroyed centuries of history searching for imaginary treasure. Gold beads were stolen. Soapstone birds were taken. Pottery was removed. Iron tools were shipped away. Everything was sent to European museums. Labeled, from unknown civilization, not African, never African. Among these men was J. Theodore Bent, a British explorer who arrived in 1891. Bent was educated, methodical. He measured walls, drew maps, recorded finds, and everywhere he looked, he found African evidence. Local pottery styles, regional metallurgy, indigenous construction techniques. The truth was in front of him, but he refused to see it. In his published report, Bent wrote that the ruins were built by a northern race, a vague, imaginary people, white enough to preserve his worldview. By now, denial had become institutional. Museums supported it. Universities repeated it. Governments promoted it. School textbooks taught it. The myth hardened into doctrine, and anyone who challenged it became an enemy. Meanwhile, the Shona people continued living among the ruins. They farmed nearby. They held ceremonies. They honored ancestors. They remembered, but no one listened. Their voices were dismissed as superstition. Their history was erased. Their knowledge was ignored. The greatest irony was this: every European who studied Great Zimbabwe depended on Africans. African guides led them. African workers excavated. African translators explained. African elders shared stories. Without Africans, no outsider could even reach the site. Yet outsiders claimed Africans were incapable. It was intellectual theft, built on hypocrisy. By the end of the 19th century, the damage was immense. Walls were ruined. layers of history destroyed, artifacts scattered across continents. And the lie was deeply rooted. Great Zimbabwe was officially declared non-African, and that declaration would shape policy, education, and identity for decades. But history has a way of resisting lies. Even the strongest myths crack under evidence. And in the early 20th century, a new kind of archaeologist arrived. One who valued truth over ideology. One who would risk his career to challenge empire. By the early 1900s, the lie about Great Zimbabwe had become official. It was no longer just a rumor told by explorers. It was doctrine, written into books, taught in classrooms, displayed in museums, defended in universities. According to colonial scholarship, Africans could not have built Great Zimbabwe. Therefore, someone else must have. This assumption became the foundation of research. Not evidence, not data, assumption. And everything that followed was shaped by it. In Rhodesia, the British-controlled territory that would later become Zimbabwe, the ruins became political weapons. Cecil Rhodes and his British South Africa Company had seized enormous areas of land. African communities were displaced. Families were forced into labor. Traditional leadership structures were dismantled. All of this was justified by one idea. Africans had no civilization. They needed European rule. Great Zimbabwe threatened that idea, so it had to be neutralized. Colonial officials controlled access to the site. They decided who could excavate, what could be published, which theories were acceptable. Research that suggested African origins was discouraged, sometimes blocked, sometimes ridiculed, sometimes quietly buried. This was censorship disguised as scholarship. The destruction continued. Untrained diggers tore through layers of soil. They ignored stratigraphy. They mixed artifacts from different periods. They destroyed context. Context is everything in archaeology. Without it, objects lose meaning. Without it, dating becomes impossible. Without it, history collapses. And that was exactly what happened. Decades of careless excavation erased priceless information forever. Not by accident, by design. Artifacts taken from Great Zimbabwe filled European museums. Gold jewelry, soapstone carvings, ceramics, iron tools. They were displayed behind glass, with vague labels. From southern Africa, unknown origin, ancient civilization, never, made by Shona ancestors, never, African achievement. The erasure was systematic. In Rhodesian schools, children were taught lies. Black children were told their ancestors were primitive. White children were told Africans had no history. Both were poisoned. Both were denied truth. Both were shaped by propaganda. A generation grew up believing that greatness came from outside, that Africa had nothing of its own. This was not ignorance. It was strategy. If people believe they have no past, they are easier to control. If they believe their ancestors achieved nothing, they accept subjugation. If they feel inferior, they stop resisting. History became a tool of domination. But cracks were forming. Inside the academic world, some researchers were becoming uncomfortable. They saw the evidence. They knew the theories made no sense. They noticed that every artifact pointed to African origin. The pottery matched local traditions. The metallurgy was indigenous. The architecture followed regional patterns. Trade goods were imported, yes, but construction was local. Administration was local. Culture was local. Everything was African, except the narrative. One young archaeologist decided he could no longer participate in the lie. His name was David Randall McIver. McIver arrived at Great Zimbabwe in 1905. Unlike his predecessors, he had formal training. He understood stratigraphy. He followed scientific methods. He excavated carefully. He documented everything. He asked questions instead of imposing answers. And what he found was undeniable. Layer by layer, the truth emerged. African pottery in every level. Local iron tools. Indigenous building techniques. No foreign artifacts from construction phases. No Middle Eastern foundations. No ancient Mediterranean layers. Nothing. Great Zimbabwe was medieval. African. Shona. McIver published his findings. And all hell broke loose. Colonial scholars attacked him. Journals mocked him. Officials questioned his competence. Some accused him of political motives. Others implied he was naive. His reputation was targeted. Not because he was wrong, because he was right. The Rhodesian administration was furious. If McIver's conclusions were accepted, everything collapsed. Land seizures became theft. Forced labor became exploitation. White rule became illegitimate. So his work was quietly sidelined, ignored, undermined, not officially banned, just buried. The lie survived, but it was weaker now. And in 1929, another challenger arrived. A woman, a scientist, a scholar who would deliver the final blow. Her name was Gertrude Cotton Thompson. Cotton Thompson was meticulous. She brought modern excavation methods. She recorded every layer, every artifact, every feature. She cross-dated pottery, compared bead types, analyzed construction phases. And in 1931, she presented her results. They were devastating. Great Zimbabwe was African. Period. No foreigners. No ancient visitors. No biblical builders. Only local people. Between the 11th and 15th centuries. The evidence was overwhelming. The academic community fell silent. There was no counterargument. No alternative explanation. The truth had won. Scientifically. But politically, the battle was not over. The Rhodesian government reacted quickly. They restricted research, limited access, controlled publications, maintained false teaching. They could not refute the evidence. So they suppressed it. For decades, two realities existed. In serious scholarship, Great Zimbabwe was African. In public education, it was not. A split between truth and propaganda. Between science and power. Meanwhile, African voices were still ignored. Oral traditions, local histories, community memory, all dismissed as unreliable. Yet these traditions had been right all along. They always knew. This chapter of history reveals something disturbing. Knowledge is not always suppressed by ignorance. Sometimes it is suppressed by fear. Fear of losing power. Fear of losing privilege. Fear of losing control. But no lie lasts forever. And soon, forces outside academia would reclaim Great Zimbabwe's meaning. Not through journals. Not through conferences. But through revolution. For centuries, the truth about Great Zimbabwe never disappeared. It was never lost. It was never forgotten. It was never mysterious. It lived in stories, in songs, in rituals, in memory. It lived in the voices of the Shona people. But no one in power listened. Long before Europeans arrived, local communities knew these ruins. They called them sacred. They associated them with ancestors. They told stories of powerful rulers, of prosperous times, of distant trade, of sacred kings, of spiritual authority. These were not myths. They were oral history, a different way of recording the past. Not written on paper, written in people. In Shona society, elders are living archives. They memorize genealogies. They preserve clan histories. They remember migrations. They recount wars. They pass knowledge across generations. When outsiders asked about Great Zimbabwe, elders answered, "This was built by our ancestors. This was the seat of kings. This was the center of power." But Europeans dismissed them. They are superstitious. They exaggerate. They don't understand. They are unreliable. This was arrogance disguised as skepticism. Colonial scholars believed that history only existed when written. No books, no history, no documents, no civilization. This mindset erased entire cultures. Across Africa, across indigenous societies worldwide. If knowledge was not recorded in European languages, it was considered meaningless. Yet oral traditions often proved more accurate than colonial theories. They correctly identified the builders, the rulers, the sacred spaces, the ceremonial areas, the meaning of symbols, even the approximate dates, long before archaeology confirmed them. One example is the soapstone birds. 8 of them were found at Great Zimbabwe, carved in meticulous detail, mounted on tall pedestals, placed in sacred enclosures. To Europeans, they were artifacts. To the Shona, they were sacred, representations of ancestral spirits, symbols of royal authority, connections between worlds. When Europeans removed them and shipped them abroad, they were not just stealing objects. They were breaking spiritual links. Local communities protested. They asked for their return. They were ignored. Museums claimed scientific ownership. Empire claimed moral authority. And spiritual heritage was locked behind glass. Even the layout of the city reflected traditions that locals understood. Certain areas were restricted. Certain paths were ceremonial. Certain spaces were gendered. Certain zones were sacred. Archaeologists initially missed this. They saw stones. Locals saw meaning. For example, the hill complex. To outsiders, it was a fortress. To the Shona, it was a sacred royal center. A place of ritual. A place of communication with ancestors. A place where political power was sanctified. Without local interpretation, researchers misunderstood its function. Colonial authorities feared these traditions. They discouraged ceremonies, restricted access, banned gatherings. They worried that spiritual connection would fuel resistance. They were right, because memory is power. When people remember who they are, they resist domination. When they know their ancestors were great, they reject inferiority. When they feel connected to sacred places, they defend them. So memory had to be broken. Missionaries played a role too. Many condemned traditional practices as pagan. They discouraged ancestor veneration. They promoted European values. Some genuinely believed they were helping. Others were tools of empire. Either way, they weakened cultural transmission. Yet traditions survived. In secret, in families, in private rituals, in remote villages, in whispered stories. Knowledge went underground. But it did not die. Women played a crucial role in this preservation. Grandmothers, mothers, spirit mediums, ritual specialists. They passed down songs, taught ceremonies, maintained spiritual practices. Even when banned, even when mocked, even when punished, history survived through them. Spirit mediums were especially important. In Shona belief, mediums allow ancestors to speak. They advise leaders, warn communities, interpret crises. During colonial rule, these mediums became centers of resistance. They reminded people of past greatness. They predicted liberation. They connected struggle to spiritual duty. Colonial officials feared them. Some were arrested. Some were silenced. Some disappeared. Despite repression, oral history endured. And when independence came, it resurfaced, like water breaking through concrete. In the 1960s and 70s, liberation movements began invoking Great Zimbabwe, not as a ruin, as a symbol, a reminder, proof. We built this. This is ours. We are not inferior. The past became a weapon. Songs referenced ancient kings. Poems celebrated stone builders. Speeches invoked ancestral power. The soapstone bird became a revolutionary emblem. History returned to politics, but this time on African terms. When Zimbabwe gained independence in 1980, ceremonies were held at the ruins. Elders cried. Veterans saluted. Communities gathered. For many, it was the first time the state officially recognized what they had always known, that their ancestors were architects of greatness. Suddenly, oral tradition was no longer dismissed. It was validated. It was respected. It was incorporated into research. Archaeologists began collaborating with communities, listening, learning, reinterpreting. A new approach emerged. Decolonized archaeology. This did not mean abandoning science. It meant expanding it, including indigenous knowledge, recognizing multiple ways of knowing, balancing data with memory. facts with meaning. Great Zimbabwe became more than an archaeological site. It became living heritage, a place where past and present meet, where ancestors and descendants connect, where history breathes. But understanding voices is only part of the story. To fully grasp Great Zimbabwe, we must go back further. Before kings, before walls, before gold, before cities, to the roots of this civilization. Great civilizations do not appear overnight. They are not created by a single ruler. They are not born from a single invention. They grow, slowly, across generations, through trial and error, through success and failure, through adaptation. Great Zimbabwe was no different. Its story begins long before stone walls rose on granite hills. It begins with people learning how to live with the land. Thousands of years ago, southern Africa was home to hunter-gatherers. They followed animals, collected wild plants, lived in small, mobile groups. They left behind rock art, stone tools, and deep knowledge of the environment. Some of their descendants still exist today. Their presence forms the oldest layer of human history in the region. Around 2,000 years ago, something changed. Waves of Bantu-speaking peoples began moving southward. They brought agriculture. They brought livestock. They brought ironworking. They brought new social structures. These migrations were not invasions. They were gradual movements. Families seeking land. Communities expanding. Cultures mixing. Among these migrants were the ancestors of the Shona. They settled on the Zimbabwe Plateau, a region with fertile soil, reliable rainfall, abundant granite, and rich mineral deposits. It was ideal for long-term settlement. These early communities were farmers and herders. They grew sorghum and millet. They raised cattle and goats. They smelted iron. They made tools. They built permanent villages. They developed trade networks. They formed clans. They honored ancestors. This was the foundation. At first, settlements were small, clusters of huts, surrounded by fields, protected by wooden fences. Stone was used sparingly, mostly for cattle enclosures. These early stone structures were practical, but they were also symbolic. Stone meant permanence, stability, status. Over time, some villages grew larger. Successful farmers produced surplus. Surplus supported specialists, blacksmiths, potters, traders, ritual leaders, administrators. Society became layered. Not everyone did the same work. Not everyone had the same power. Complexity increased. Trade played a crucial role. By the 9th and 10th centuries, connections to the East African coast were expanding. Arab and Persian merchants established trading towns. Kilwa, Mombasa, Zanzibar. These ports linked Africa to the Indian Ocean world, and interior societies joined the network. Gold was the key. The Zimbabwe Plateau was rich in gold. Rivers carried gold dust. Quartz veins held gold deposits. Local miners learned to extract it. They used fire setting. They followed veins underground. They refined ore. They became specialists. Gold became currency, power, prestige. But gold alone does not create civilization. Organization does. As trade intensified, wealth accumulated. Some families became richer. Some leaders became more powerful. Some settlements became central hubs. They controlled routes, collected tribute, provided protection, hosted traders, distributed goods. Authority emerged. Around the 11th century, a major shift occurred. One settlement began to dominate, located among granite hills, strategically positioned near trade routes, close to gold fields, protected by natural terrain. This place would become Great Zimbabwe. At first, it was modest. Stone walls surrounded elite residences. Cattle enclosures expanded. Ritual spaces developed. Gradually, construction intensified. Generation after generation added new walls, new enclosures, new terraces. What began as a chiefdom became a state. Stone architecture evolved. Builders perfected coursing techniques. They selected better granite. They standardized construction. They trained apprentices. They created an architectural tradition. Stone became language, a way to express authority. Political organization matured. Leaders claimed sacred legitimacy. They linked themselves to ancestors. They controlled rituals. They managed tribute. They regulated trade. They arbitrated disputes. Power became institutional, not personal. Religious life deepened. Sacred sites were formalized. Spirit mediums gained authority. Rainmaking rituals became central. The ruler became guardian of cosmic balance. Failure meant loss of legitimacy. Success meant divine approval. By the 12th century, Great Zimbabwe was no longer just another settlement. It was a capital, a center, a magnet. People migrated toward it. Craftsmen settled nearby. Merchants established residences. Administrators built compounds. Population grew. Urbanization followed. Homesteads spread across hillsides. Stone enclosures multiplied. Craft zones emerged. Markets formed. Storage facilities expanded. Food production intensified. Everything revolved around the capital. This was not imitation of foreign models. It was indigenous innovation, local solutions to local challenges, rooted in African traditions, refined through experience. Great Zimbabwe represented the peak of this evolutionary process. Centuries of development crystallized in stone. It embodied accumulated knowledge, environmental adaptation, social experimentation, political refinement, economic integration. But civilization is not just about structures. It is about relationships, between people, between regions, between continents. And to understand Great Zimbabwe's true power, we must follow its trade routes, across savannas, across rivers, across oceans, to the wider world. Every great civilization is built on exchange. Ideas, goods, skills, resources. No society rises in isolation. Great Zimbabwe was no exception. Its true strength did not come only from stone walls or sacred kings. It came from trade, from its position at the heart of one of the medieval world's most important commercial networks. From gold. Long before Europeans sailed into the Indian Ocean, Africa was already connected to global commerce. For centuries, merchants had moved along the Swahili Coast. Arab, Persian, Indian, African. They built port cities, developed shipping routes, created trading partnerships, and linked East Africa to Asia and the Middle East. Kilwa, Mombasa, Sofala, Zanzibar. These were not European colonies. They were African-controlled city-states, multicultural, cosmopolitan, wealthy, and they depended on the interior. On Great Zimbabwe, gold flowed from the Zimbabwe Plateau to the coast. In return came luxury goods, glass beads, cotton cloth, ceramics, metal items, spices, coins. This was not barter between unequal partners. This was negotiated trade between powers. At the heart of this system stood the rulers of Great Zimbabwe. They did not mine every ounce of gold. They controlled movement, access, routes, markets, tribute. They were middlemen of empire. Miners worked riverbeds and reefs. They followed gold-bearing veins underground. They used fire to crack rock. They refined ore. They produced dust, nuggets, and beads. This required skill, experience, and coordination. Gold was collected, taxed, stored, redistributed, traded. Nothing moved without approval. This was state economics, not random commerce. Ivory was equally important. Elephants roamed southern Africa in vast numbers. Their tusks were prized across the Indian Ocean world, carved into ornaments, used in medicine, displayed as status symbols. Hunters supplied the capital. The elite took their share. The rest went east. Cattle, copper, iron, salt, grain, skins, all circulated through Great Zimbabwe. The city became a clearinghouse, a marketplace, a warehouse, a financial center. Swahili merchants traveled inland. They brought goods. They negotiated. They formed partnerships. They learned local customs. They respected political authority. They did not conquer. They traded. Archaeology confirms this network. Chinese celadone bowls, Persian glass beads, Indian textiles, Arab coins, Middle Eastern pottery, all found in Great Zimbabwe, some in elite areas, some in common homes. Wealth was not limited to kings. It spread. This is important. It shows economic depth, not just elite luxury, but broad participation, a middle class, skilled workers, independent traders, artisans with purchasing power. Great Zimbabwe's economy was diversified. It was not dependent on one commodity. If gold production declined, ivory compensated. If trade shifted, agriculture sustained. If drought came, cattle reserves helped. For centuries, the system proved resilient. Trade also brought ideas, styles, technologies, aesthetics, ceramic designs, clothing patterns, metalworking techniques, architectural influences, but these were adapted, not copied. Zimbabwean culture remained distinct. Chinese porcelain was valued, not because it was Chinese, but because it was beautiful, because it signaled status, because it fit local taste. Cultural exchange was selective, intentional, creative. Diplomacy was part of commerce. Traders were guests, protected by rulers, housed by officials, integrated into networks. Their safety depended on political stability, which gave rulers leverage. This system required bureaucracy, officials, record keepers, inspectors, tax collectors, envoys. We don't have written records, but material evidence proves administration. You cannot manage transcontinental trade without organization. At its peak in the 13th and 14th centuries, Great Zimbabwe stood at the center of a trading web stretching from southern Africa to China. Very few medieval cities could claim that. Venice could, Baghdad could, Chang'an could, Great Zimbabwe could. And yet, unlike European empires, it did not rely on military conquest. There were no vast armies, no campaigns of expansion, no occupation forces. Power came from economics, from ritual authority, from control of routes, from legitimacy. This made the system efficient, but also vulnerable. When trade routes shifted, when competitors rose, when monopolies weakened, power declined. We will return to that later. For now, understand this. Great Zimbabwe was not a backwater. It was not isolated. It was not peripheral. It was central to the medieval world economy. Its merchants were global. Its goods were international. Its rulers were economic strategists. Its people were participants in globalization centuries before Europe dominated the seas. But trade alone does not create civilization. We must understand daily life, families, homes, work, social structure. What did it mean to live inside this stone city? To understand Great Zimbabwe, we must move beyond walls and trade routes. We must enter the city, walk its paths, listen to its sounds, observe its rhythms, see how ordinary people lived. Because civilization is not built only by kings. It is built by families, by workers, by farmers, by craftsmen, by traders, by children, by elders, by communities. Imagine Great Zimbabwe around the year 1300. The sun rises over granite hills. Light reflects off pale stone walls. Smoke drifts from cooking fires. Cattle low in nearby enclosures. Metal hammers ring against anvils. Voices echo through stone corridors. This is a living city. The city is spread across hills and valleys. There are no straight streets, no rigid grids. Paths follow terrain. Homes adapt to slopes. Enclosures curve naturally. The landscape shapes architecture, not the other way around. At the center lies elite space, the hill complex, the great enclosure, restricted areas, guarded paths, sacred zones. Here live rulers and nobles, priests, senior officials. Their homes are surrounded by massive walls. Their spaces are secluded. Their access is controlled. Beyond these lie commoner neighborhoods, Hundreds of smaller stone enclosures. Each one marks a family compound. Inside are circular huts, wooden poles, mud walls, thatched roofs. Simple, efficient, adapted to climate. Stone walls do not form houses. They define space. They mark ownership. They show status. They protect livestock. They separate public from private. Stone is social language. Families live together. Parents, children, grandparents, extended relatives. Households are economic units. They farm. They herd. They craft. They trade. They produce. They consume. They save. Women play central roles. They manage food, grind grain, prepare meals, raise children, make pottery, trade goods, transmit culture. Their labor sustains the city. Men farm, herd cattle, mine gold, smelt iron, build walls, serve as guards, act as traders. They also participate in rituals, politics, community councils. Children learn by doing. They herd goats, fetch water, collect firewood, observe crafts, absorb traditions. Education is practical, embedded in daily life. Craft zones are scattered through the city. Metalworking areas, pottery kilns, gold-working spaces, weaving stations. Each produces specialized goods. Each supports trade. Each reflects skill. Ironworking is especially important. Tools, weapons, agricultural implements, all depend on iron. Slag heaps reveal intensive production. Furnaces glow at night. Blacksmiths are respected specialists, often associated with spiritual power. Potters shape vessels, storage jars, cooking pots, beer containers, ceremonial items. Their designs reflect identity, clan affiliation, aesthetic taste. Goldsmiths craft beads and ornaments. They work carefully, precisely, patiently. Gold is wealth, but also beauty, symbol, status. Markets are informal but vibrant. Traders display goods. Negotiations take place. Prices are discussed. News spreads. Relationships form. Markets are social spaces, not just economic ones. Cattle are central to everything. They are wealth, insurance, bride price, status, food reserve, political tool. Rulers accumulate cattle, redistribute them, reward loyalty, build alliances. Cattle enclosures are prominent. Stone-walled kraals, carefully constructed, protected, central to family compounds. The smell of livestock fills the air. Food production supports urban life. Fields of millet and sorghum surround the city. Irrigation is minimal. Rain-fed agriculture dominates. Farmers time planting carefully. Climate knowledge is vital. Grain is stored in raised granaries, protected from pests, used during shortages. Surplus enables specialization. Without surplus, no city exists. Beer brewing is widespread. Large ceramic vessels ferment sorghum beer. Beer is not just recreation. It is ritual, diplomacy, celebration, negotiation, community bonding. Festivals mark seasons. Harvest, rain, royal ceremonies, ancestral commemorations, music, drumming, dance, storytelling, all reinforce identity. Social hierarchy exists. Rulers, nobles, officials, merchants, craftsmen, farmers, possibly slaves. Status matters, but mobility exists. Wealth can elevate. Skill can advance. Favor can transform. There is inequality, but also obligation. Elites must give, host feasts, provide protection, fund rituals, redistribute wealth. Prestige requires generosity. Crime exists. Disputes occur. Property conflicts, family tensions, inheritance issues. These are resolved through councils, elders, customary law, ritual mediation. Life is structured, but not rigid. Order exists, but flexibility remains. This balance creates stability. Religion permeates everything. Homes contain shrines. Offerings are made. Ancestors are consulted. Spirits are respected. No clear boundary exists between sacred and secular. Death is significant. Burials are ritualized. Ancestors join the spirit world. They remain involved. They watch. They judge. They guide. Everyday life in Great Zimbabwe is rich, complex, organized, human, not exotic, not primitive, not simple. It is civilization in action. But above daily life stands sacred authority. Kings, spirits, cosmic order. Without them, the system collapses. To understand power here, we must enter the spiritual world. At Great Zimbabwe, power did not rest on swords. It did not depend on armies. It did not rely on fear alone. Power flowed from something deeper, from belief, from ritual, from the spirit world, from the ancestors. The ruler of Great Zimbabwe was called the Mambo. But he was more than a king. He was a sacred figure, a bridge between worlds, a living connection between the people and their ancestors, between the visible and the invisible, between earth and heaven. In Shona tradition, ancestors are not dead. They are present. They watch. They guide. They reward. They punish. They influence rain, fertility, health, success, failure, everything. To live well, one must live in harmony with them. The Mambo's primary duty was spiritual. He ensured that rituals were performed correctly, that offerings were made, that taboos were respected, that cosmic balance was maintained. If he failed, disaster followed. Drought? The ancestors are angry. Disease? Spirits are displeased. Crop failure? Rituals were neglected. Political crisis was spiritual crisis. They were inseparable. This belief created accountability. A ruler who failed spiritually lost legitimacy. He could be challenged, removed, replaced. Sacred kingship limited tyranny. Spirit mediums played a crucial role. They entered trance states, became possessed, spoke with ancestral voices, interpreted omens, advised leaders, warned communities. They were independent authorities, not controlled by the king. This created balance. The Mambo had to consult them. He could not rule alone. Decisions required spiritual approval. War, trade, succession, land disputes, all passed through ritual channels. The hill complex was the heart of this system. It was not merely a palace. It was a sacred mountain, a ritual center, a spiritual fortress. Its narrow passages were intentional. They disoriented visitors, created awe, induced humility, prepared minds for sacred encounter. Approaching the ruler was a spiritual journey, not a political appointment. Each turn reminded visitors of their insignificance. Each wall reinforced hierarchy. Architecture expressed theology. The eastern enclosure of the hill complex was especially sacred. Here stood the soapstone birds, mounted on tall pillars, overlooking the valley, watching the people, symbolizing ancestral guardians. These birds are unique, stylized, powerful, mysterious, part human, part animal, part spiritual. They represent authority, continuity, protection. They embody sacred kingship. Ritual calendars structured political life, rainmaking ceremonies, harvest festivals, ancestral commemorations, initiation rites, royal celebrations, all reinforced legitimacy. Failure to perform rituals could destroy a ruler. Success strengthened authority. Power depended on competence, not birth alone. Succession was complex. Kingship was hereditary, but not automatic. Candidates had to demonstrate spiritual fitness, moral character, ritual knowledge, ancestral favor. Lineage alone was insufficient. This created internal competition, rival factions, court intrigue, spiritual politics. These tensions mattered later. During decline, religion also regulated social behavior. Taboos governed land use, marriage, hunting, mining, environmental management. Violating taboos risked spiritual punishment. This encouraged restraint. Sacred groves, holy springs, ritual caves. These protected ecological zones. Early conservation through belief. Priests and ritual specialists maintained these systems. They memorized chants, preserved rituals, trained successors. They were cultural guardians. Women often served as spirit mediums. They held spiritual authority, influenced politics, advised leaders, balanced male dominance. Gender power was complex, not one-dimensional. Foreign traders respected these beliefs. They participated in rituals, gave offerings, sought spiritual permission. Trade required cultural diplomacy. This spiritual political system created stability. It unified society, legitimized hierarchy, controlled conflict, integrated economy and belief. But it also created vulnerability. When drought struck, when trade declined, when cattle died, people questioned leadership. Spiritual legitimacy eroded, and power weakened. Sacred authority was powerful, but fragile. It depended on success, on prosperity, on harmony. When conditions changed, belief shifted. And when belief shifted, walls meant nothing. But before we explore collapse, we must appreciate another pillar of greatness: engineering, architecture, technical genius, the mastery of stone. In the next chapter, we will examine how Great Zimbabwe was built. Without mortar, without steel, without machines, only with knowledge, skill, and organization. When visitors first arrive at Great Zimbabwe, one question dominates their minds. How was this built? No cement, no steel, no cranes, no modern tools. Yet the walls stand after 7 centuries. Some over 30 feet high, some 16 feet thick, some stretching hundreds of meters, perfectly balanced, perfectly aligned, perfectly stable. This is not primitive construction. This is advanced engineering. The builders of Great Zimbabwe mastered granite. Granite is hard, difficult to shape, heavy, unforgiving. Working it requires knowledge and patience. They quarried it from nearby outcrops, heating rock with fire, then cooling it rapidly with water, causing it to fracture. This is called fire setting, an ancient but effective technique. Once cracked, stones were shaped, hammered, trimmed, smoothed, not into perfect cubes, but into stable blocks, designed to interlock. Each stone selected for position, size, weight, shape. Builders understood physics, balance, load distribution, friction, center of gravity. They did not calculate with equations. They calculated with experience, with tradition, with apprenticeship. Walls were constructed using coursing. Stones laid in horizontal layers, each layer slightly receding inward, creating a gentle inward curve. This gives stability, prevents collapse, distributes weight. This technique is sophisticated, comparable to classical masonry. The absence of mortar was intentional. Mortar cracks, mortar weakens, mortar fails under temperature change. Dry stone walls flex. They move slightly. They absorb stress. They survive earthquakes and erosion. This is smart design. Some walls contain nearly 1 million stones. Each had to be quarried, transported, shaped, placed by hand. Think about the labor. Thousands of workers, over generations, coordinated, federal housed, supervised. This is industrial-scale organization. Construction was staged. Older walls reinforced. New enclosures added. Terraces expanded. Passages refined. The city evolved. It was never finished. It grew organically. Builders also used decorative patterns, chevron designs, herringbone motifs, geometric bands. These appear near wall tops, purely aesthetic, symbolic, not structural. This shows artistic intention, not just function. The great enclosure is the masterpiece, an elliptical structure, over 800 feet in circumference, walls up to 11 meters high, 16 feet thick at base, perfectly vertical. Inside stands the conical tower, a solid stone structure, 30 feet tall. No entrance, no chamber, no function we fully understand. The tower may represent a grain silo, a fertility symbol, royal authority, cosmic order, architectural ambition. We don't know, and that mystery adds power. Drainage systems were integrated. Water channels, slopes, runoff management, preventing erosion, protecting foundations. This shows environmental awareness. Stone terraces stabilized hillsides, prevented landslides, expanded building space, controlled water flow, landscape engineering. Paths were designed intentionally. Narrow corridors, blind turns, restricted views, psychological architecture, movement control, security, ritual effect. Construction was specialized. Not everyone built walls. Master masons trained apprentices. Knowledge passed down. Styles standardized. Mistakes minimized. This implies professional builders. Tool evidence supports this. Stone hammers, iron chisels, wooden levers, ropes, rollers, simple tools. Used intelligently. Transportation was efficient. Stones were moved short distances. Most quarries were nearby. Builders chose locations strategically, minimizing transport, maximizing efficiency. Resource management was impressive. Wood for fires, water for workers, food for laborers, all coordinated. Supply chains existed. This was logistics. Great Zimbabwe was built without slavery on a massive scale. Labor was likely organized through tribute, community obligation, seasonal work, religious duty, prestige participation. People built because it mattered. Monumental construction created unity, shared effort, collective identity, pride. The walls were social projects, not just royal vanity. Comparisons matter. At the same time, Europe built Gothic cathedrals. Asia built pagodas. Africa built Great Zimbabwe. Parallel achievements, different methods, equal genius. The engineering of Great Zimbabwe refutes every racist myth. Proves technical sophistication, mathematical intuition, design intelligence, project management, long-term planning. These stones are textbooks in granite, written by hands, read by time. But no structure lasts forever, no matter how well built. Even the strongest systems face stress. Economic, environmental, political, spiritual. In the next chapter, we will explore Great Zimbabwe's golden age. This peak, its maximum power, its greatest achievements. Before the cracks appeared. Every civilization has a moment when everything aligns. Resources, leadership, trade, stability, belief, confidence. For Great Zimbabwe, that moment came between the 13th and 14th centuries. This was its golden age, its peak of power, its age of prosperity, its moment of greatness. By this time, the city had reached its maximum scale. Stone enclosures spread across more than 1,700 acres. Hundreds of compounds dotted the landscape. Tens of thousands lived in the region. Trade routes were secure. Tribute flowed steadily. Authority was undisputed. The Mambo ruled from the hill complex. His power was recognized across the plateau. Sub-chiefs governed outlying territories. They collected cattle, gold, grain, labor. All flowed to the capital, then were redistributed. This created loyalty. Administrative networks were well established. Messengers traveled between settlements. Information moved quickly. Decisions were coordinated. Justice was enforced. The state functioned. Trade was booming. Kilwa and Sofala were thriving ports. Ships arrived from Arabia, India, and China. Gold from Zimbabwe filled their holds. Luxury goods returned inland. The capital glittered with imported wealth. Chinese celadone bowls sat beside local pottery. Persian beads adorned African clothing. Indian cloth mixed with regional designs. Great Zimbabwe was cosmopolitan, global, connected. Art flourished. Gold jewelry, carved soapstone, decorated ceramics, symbolic motifs. Aesthetic sophistication expanded. Beauty mattered. Expression mattered. The soapstone birds were prominently displayed. They symbolized unity. authority, continuity, connection to ancestors. They were national emblems centuries before nations existed. Religious life was vibrant. Ceremonies were elaborate. Festivals were frequent. Ancestral rituals reinforced legitimacy. Rainmaking rites ensured agricultural success. The spiritual system worked. Agriculture was productive. Fields were well managed. Crop rotation improved yields. Livestock herds expanded. Food security supported urban life. Surplus fed specialists. Craft production intensified. Ironworking reached high levels. Gold refinement improved. Pottery diversified. Weaving expanded. Export goods increased. Social mobility existed. Successful traders rose. Skilled craftsmen gained prestige. Loyal officials advanced. Wealth was not frozen. Opportunity existed. Diplomacy stabilized relations. Neighboring polities recognized Great Zimbabwe's authority. Tribute replaced war. Influence expanded peacefully. The city was secure. Its location among granite hills provided natural defense. Political legitimacy reduced internal conflict. External threats were minimal. For generations, peace prevailed. Travelers who passed through were impressed. Oral accounts describe grandeur, order, wealth, respect. Great Zimbabwe was admired, feared, envied. At its height, it rivaled major medieval centers. Venice, Baghdad, Cairo, Hangzhou, not in size, but in connectivity, in wealth flow, in organizational complexity. Yet success carries hidden dangers. Growth increases demand. Wealth attracts rivals. Population strains resources. Complex systems become fragile. Great Zimbabwe's prosperity depended on balance. Between people and land. Between center and periphery. Between tradition and change. Between monopoly and competition. During the Golden Age, balance held. But pressures were building. Slowly, silently, invisibly. Environmental stress, trade competition, political rivalry, demographic growth, all accumulating, like tectonic plates. Before an earthquake, the rulers did not see collapse coming. Few civilizations ever do. They assume success is permanent. They mistake stability for invincibility. The stones were strong, the economy vibrant, the rituals powerful. Everything looked solid. But underneath, cracks were forming. In the next chapter, we will explore those cracks. The warning signs, the pressures, the vulnerabilities that began to undermine this great civilization. Great civilizations rarely collapse suddenly. They weaken first, quietly, gradually, almost invisibly. From the outside, everything seems stable. Inside, pressure builds. Great Zimbabwe was no exception. By the early 15th century, warning signs were everywhere, but few recognized them. The first major strain came from the environment. Great Zimbabwe stood in a semi-arid region. Rainfall was unpredictable. Agriculture depended on seasonal patterns. For centuries, farmers had adapted, but population growth changed the equation. At its peak, tens of thousands depended on the surrounding land. Fields expanded. Forests were cleared. Wood was burned for fuel. Grazing intensified. Soil was stressed. Vegetation declined. The land was pushed hard. Cattle herds grew enormous. Elite families accumulated livestock as wealth. Thousands of animals grazed nearby plains. Overgrazing became severe. Grasslands thinned. Erosion increased. Water sources weakened. Archaeological pollen records reveal this change. Woodlands shrank. Grass species shifted. Signs of environmental pressure appeared. Nature was sending warnings. Then came droughts. Climate studies indicate reduced rainfall in the 1400s. Dry seasons lengthened. Rains failed. Crops suffered. Pastures deteriorated. Food became scarce. When food shortages appear, everything changes. Prices rise. Tensions grow. Trust weakens. Social order strains. The sacred system began to falter. The mambo was expected to ensure prosperity. Drought signaled spiritual failure. People whispered, "Have the ancestors withdrawn their favor?" Legitimacy weakened. At the same time, economic competition intensified. Great Zimbabwe's trade monopoly was fading. New centers emerged. To the north, Mutapa. To the southwest, Torwa with its capital at Kami. These states controlled alternative routes. They attracted merchants. They diverted gold flows. Trade no longer had to pass through Great Zimbabwe. Middleman power declined. Revenue dropped. Tribute decreased. The state's financial base eroded. Elite wealth suffered. Redistribution weakened. Patronage declined. Loyalty faltered. Officials defected. Local rulers grew independent. Political tensions intensified. Succession disputes became frequent. Rival lineages competed. Court factions plotted. Unity fractured. Without strong central authority, regional leaders asserted autonomy. They withheld tribute, controlled local trade, built their own capitals. Fragmentation accelerated. Urban stress increased. Population density strained sanitation. Waste management worsened. Disease risk rose. Health declined. Mortality increased. Food insecurity forced migration. Some families left. Others followed. Gradual depopulation began. Not dramatic, but steady. Construction slowed. Major building projects ceased. Walls were no longer expanded. Maintenance declined. Craft production shrank. Signs of contraction appeared. Foreign traders noticed the change. They shifted partnerships, sought stability elsewhere. Economic confidence eroded. Religious authority suffered. Spirit mediums criticized leadership. Ritual failures multiplied. Prophecies of decline circulated. Spiritual confidence collapsed. The system that once ensured stability now amplified crisis. Environmental stress weakened economy. Economic decline undermined legitimacy. Political conflict intensified fragmentation. Spiritual doubt destroyed cohesion. Each problem fed the next. This is systemic collapse. Not invasion. Not catastrophe. Internal breakdown. Importantly, there is no evidence of massive warfare. No burn layers. No mass graves. No siege marks. No destroyed palaces. Great Zimbabwe was not conquered. It unraveled. Leaders attempted reforms. Relocation. New alliances. Trade adjustments. But it was too late. Momentum had shifted. By mid-15th century, the capital's authority was hollow. The Mambo's influence shrank. Power migrated. People followed opportunity, not tradition. This was the turning point, the moment when greatness faded, when the center could no longer hold, when history pivoted. But collapse did not mean disappearance. It meant transformation. The story continues. In new capitals, new kingdoms, new forms. In the next chapter, we will see how Great Zimbabwe declined without conquest, how people left, how power moved, how a city became a ruin. When most people imagine the fall of a great civilization, they imagine fire, armies, invasions, burning cities, massacres, destroyed monuments, collapsed empires. But Great Zimbabwe did not fall this way. There were no invading legions, no conquering kings, no catastrophic wars, no final battle. Its end was quieter, slower, more human. By the mid-1400s, the center of power was shifting. The capital was no longer secure economically. Trade routes had moved. Agricultural productivity declined. Political unity weakened. The system could no longer sustain itself. So people made a choice. They left. Migration began gradually. Families moved to more fertile regions, closer to water, closer to trade routes, closer to new centers of power. At first, only a few went, then more, then many. Elites were among the first. When rulers sense decline, they relocate. They establish new courts, new capitals, new networks. This is survival strategy, not abandonment. The Mambo likely moved north, toward the Mutapa kingdom, where trade was stronger, where land was richer, where authority could be rebuilt. Officials followed. Craftsmen followed. Merchants followed. Support systems relocated. The city hollowed out. Commoners remained longer. They farmed, herded cattle, used existing structures, adapted to reduce scale. Great Zimbabwe did not empty overnight. It slowly thinned. Stone walls were reused. Compounds were repurposed. Spaces were reinterpreted. The city transformed. From capital to provincial town to sacred site, trade declined. Imported goods became rare. Local production dominated. Economic complexity faded. Ritual life continued, but on smaller scale. Ceremonies persisted. Ancestral veneration remained. The site retained spiritual importance. Political authority dissolved. No central administration. No taxation system. No redistribution network. The state ended. But society did not. By around 1450, Great Zimbabwe was no longer an imperial capital. It was a memory, a legacy, a sacred landscape. Successor states rose. To the north, Mutapa. To the southwest, Torwa at Kami. They inherited traditions, architecture, political systems, trade networks, religious practices. Great Zimbabwe lived on through them. Kami developed terrace platforms, decorative stonework, new styles, evolution, not decline. Mutapa dominated gold trade, controlled Portuguese relations, maintained independence for centuries. The Zimbabwe civilization adapted. It did not disappear, changed form. Portuguese traders arrived on the coast in the 1500s. They heard stories of inland stone cities, powerful kings, rich mines. They recorded these accounts. They tried to reach them, mostly failed. African states resisted, controlled access, protected autonomy. For 3 centuries after Great Zimbabwe's decline, southern African kingdoms remained strong. They traded, governed, fought, adapted. They were not passive. They were actors. Meanwhile, Great Zimbabwe remained spiritually significant. People visited, made offerings, consulted ancestors, held ceremonies. It was not abandoned. It was redefined. This spiritual continuity protected the site. For centuries, large-scale destruction did not occur. Sacredness preserved stone. Respect prevented looting. Tradition safeguarded memory. Only colonial intrusion broke this protection. Only European greed shattered restraint. Only racism erased respect. Collapse without conquest is a lesson. It shows that civilizations can fall from internal imbalance, from environmental limits, from economic shifts, from political fragmentation, without a single enemy. It mirrors Rome's Western decline. The Maya collapse, anchors abandonment, patterns repeat, history rhymes. Great Zimbabwe's story reminds us, strength is temporary, balance is fragile, adaptation is essential. But the end of the city was not the end of meaning. In modern times, its significance would be reborn, through struggle, through resistance, through independence. For nearly a century, Great Zimbabwe existed under occupation. Not by armies, by lies, by textbooks, by museums, by propaganda, by silence. Its stones stood tall, but its story was stolen. Under colonial rule, Rhodesia's government controlled history. They decided what children learned, what teachers taught, what scholars published, what tourists heard. The message was consistent. Africans did not build this. Someone else did. Always someone else. This lie shaped identity. Black children grew up believing their ancestors were inferior. White children grew up believing they were superior. Both were victims. Both were trapped in distortion. But beneath the surface, resistance grew. African intellectuals, teachers, church leaders, activists, traditional authorities. They challenged colonial narratives. They preserved memory. They passed knowledge quietly. They refused erasure. By the 1950s and 60s, African nationalism was rising. Across the continent, colonies demanded independence. History became political. Identity became revolutionary. In Rhodesia, liberation movements emerged. ZANU, ZAPU, guerrilla fighters, political organizers, community mobilizers. They searched for symbols. They found Great Zimbabwe. The name itself was reclaimed. Zimbabwe, not Rhodesia, not Cecil Rhodes, not colonial inheritance, ancestral heritage. Liberation fighters printed the soapstone bird on pamphlets. They sang songs about stone builders. They invoked ancient kings. They told villagers, "We are heirs of this civilization. This land is ours. This history is ours." It was powerful. Great Zimbabwe became ideological ammunition. It destroyed colonial myths, proved African capacity. It legitimized resistance. It fueled courage. During the Bush War of the 1970s, the ruins became sacred ground. Freedom fighters visited secretly. Elders held ceremonies. Spirits were invoked. Struggle was spiritual as well as political. In 1980, independence arrived. Zimbabwe was born. The name itself honored the ancient city. Not the colonizer, not empire, but heritage. The new flag carried the bird. The coat of arms referenced the ruins. Currency featured its imagery. Great Zimbabwe became national identity. At independence ceremonies, many were held at the ruins. Veterans gathered. Elders wept. Survivors embraced. History returned home. Education changed. Textbooks were rewritten. Museums updated exhibits. Schools taught African origins. Archaeology was decolonized. Slowly, imperfectly, but surely, Zimbabwean scholars entered the field. Local universities trained archaeologists. Research priorities shifted. Community involvement increased. Interpretation diversified. International academia adjusted. Journals acknowledged mistakes. Museums revised labels. Some artifacts were returned. Others loaned. Repatriation debates intensified. UNESCO declared Great Zimbabwe a World Heritage Site in 1986. Global recognition followed. Visibility increased. Protection improved. Funding opportunities emerged. Tourism grew. Local guides shared stories. Communities benefited. Cultural festivals revived traditions. Heritage became livelihood. But reclamation was not simple. Politics intervened. Leaders invoked Great Zimbabwe to justify power. Symbols were politicized. History became rhetoric. Some used ancient glory to excuse modern failures. Some wrapped authoritarianism in heritage. Some silenced critics in the name of tradition. The past became contested. Scholars debated. Was Great Zimbabwe egalitarian? Exploitative? Balanced? Hierarchical? These debates mattered. They shaped how modern society interpreted itself. Decolonization was not just about replacing white voices. It was about plural voices. Scholars, elders, women, youth, communities, all participating. Traditional authorities regained influence. Ceremonies resumed. Spiritual access was restored. Sacred meanings returned. Reclaiming history healed wounds. Restored dignity. Revived pride. Corrected narratives. But reclamation is ongoing. Many artifacts remain abroad. Many textbooks remain incomplete. Many stereotypes persist. The struggle continues. Great Zimbabwe today stands as proof that lies can be defeated, that memory survives, that truth returns. Yet the story does not end with reclamation, because heritage faces new threats, modern, subtle, dangerous. In the final chapter, we will examine Great Zimbabwe today, its challenges, its future, its global meaning, and why these stones still speak. 700 years have passed since the last great walls of Great Zimbabwe were raised. 7 centuries of wind, of rain, of drought, of storms, of silence, of footsteps, of forgetting, of remembering, and still the stones remain. They have outlived kings, outlasted empires, survived conquest, endured lies, witnessed liberation. They stand today as quiet guardians of truth. When visitors walk through Great Zimbabwe now, they walk through layered time. Each wall carries memory. Each passage holds stories. Each enclosure echoes with voices long gone. This is not just a ruin. It is an archive in stone. But the site is fragile. More fragile than it appears. Climate change brings stronger rains, longer droughts, increased erosion. Temperature shifts weaken foundations. Vegetation grows through cracks. Roots pry stones apart. Water undermines walls. Nature, once managed, now threatens. Economic struggles compound the problem. Zimbabwe's post-independence history has been turbulent. Inflation, sanctions, political instability, resource shortages. Heritage funding suffers. Staff are underpaid. Equipment is limited. Maintenance is delayed. Protection is inconsistent. Some walls deteriorate. Some terraces slump. Some drainage systems fail. Damage accumulates slowly, silently, dangerously. Development pressures increase. Communities grow around the site. Farms expand. Roads are built. Houses appear. Unexcavated areas are threatened. Archaeological landscapes shrink. Illegal looting remains a risk. Not inside the main complex, but in surrounding satellite sites. Smugglers target artifacts. Global black markets fuel theft. Each stolen object erases history. Tourism brings opportunity. And danger. Foot traffic wears paths. Climbing damages walls. Unregulated access threatens stability. Love can destroy what it touches. Politics still influences heritage. Different governments use Great Zimbabwe to legitimize power. Some promote preservation. Others neglect it. Some exploit symbolism. Others ignore substance. Heritage becomes a political tool. Yet hope persists. Zimbabwean archaeologists lead research. Young scholars enter the field. Women take leadership roles. Local universities expand programs. Knowledge is being reclaimed. Community involvement grows. Local guides tell stories. Elders advise management. Youth groups participate. Cultural festivals flourish. Ownership becomes shared. Digital preservation expands. 3D scanning. Drone mapping. Virtual tours. High-resolution archives. If stones fall, memory remains. Technology protects heritage. International cooperation strengthens. UNESCO monitoring. Academic partnerships. Conservation grants. Training programs. Support networks. Global responsibility increases. The diaspora contributes. Funding projects. Raising awareness. Promoting tourism. Defending heritage abroad. Distance does not erase connection. Social media transforms visibility. Young Zimbabweans post photos, create videos, write poems, compose music, tell stories. Heritage becomes living culture. Great Zimbabwe is being reborn, not as empire, not as capital, but as identity. Its lessons matter now more than ever. It teaches that civilization is universal, not European, not Asian, not African, human. Wherever conditions allow, humans create complexity. It teaches that history can be manipulated, that lies can dominate generations, that truth requires courage. It teaches that power is fragile, that environmental limits are real, that prosperity without balance collapses. It teaches that culture survives, that people endure, that memory resists erasure. It teaches humility. No civilization is permanent. No empire eternal, no system invincible, and it teaches pride, legitimate pride, rooted in evidence, in achievement, in resilience. Great Zimbabwe deserves global recognition. It should stand alongside Machu Picchu, Angkor Wat, Petra, Stonehenge, the pyramids, not as curiosity, as equal. It belongs in every world history textbook, every museum narrative, every documentary series, every classroom, because when history excludes Africa, it lies. When it includes Great Zimbabwe, it tells the truth. Imagine a future generation, a child in Harare, or Lagos, or London, or New York, learning about medieval civilizations, and seeing Great Zimbabwe beside Notre Dame. beside the forbidden city, beside the Alhambra, not below them, beside them, equal. That child grows up knowing, my ancestors built greatness. I belong to history. I am capable. This is power. The stones still speak. They speak of engineers and farmers, of kings and traders, of mothers and children, of miners and potters, of ancestors and spirits, of struggle and survival. They speak against racism, against erasure, against ignorance, against arrogance. They speak for truth, for dignity, for humanity. Great Zimbabwe was never truly lost. It was hidden, by prejudice, by greed, by fear. Now it is found again, by evidence, by scholarship, by memory, by pride. The responsibility now is ours, to protect it, to teach it, to honor it, to listen, because these stones are not silent. They are speaking, still, forever.